All right, thank you, Joe, for the very kind introduction. As you can see from the title of the slides, I'm here to talk to you about how we can unlock the true potential of the Internet of Things. And that might sound a little bit overstated, a little bit boastful. But I think before, when you look at the numbers that Rio presented, I think before we're actually going to get to those huge, awe-inspiring numbers, we need to solve a couple of problems. We need to solve a couple of design paradigms when it comes to how we build our devices, how we build our applications. And I want to give some insight in how I look at that, how Technicolor looks at that, and how we feel the AllSeen Alliance can help and actually help us build those devices in the right way, in the right format that is going to make sense for consumers. So first, I was curious, and when I was preparing this presentation, I really wanted to know where the term the Internet of Things came from, because for a lot of people, the Internet of Things means a bunch of different things, right? I'm sure if I were to ask 10 people here in the room what IoT meant for them, I'd have at least 3 different answers. So apparently the first time the term was coined was in 1999. That's 15 years ago. That was quite surprising to me. By a guy called Kevin Ashton. I hadn't heard of him before, but apparently he's executive director at AutoID, which is an RFID lab at MIT. And his basic idea was to connect RFID tags to the internet. So when he started out, it was basically about connecting definitely dumb devices to services that are hosted on the internet, cloud services, as we say today, right? So all of the intelligence residing in the cloud, all of the applications residing in the cloud, user interfaces residing in the cloud, and that's how you interact with all of those devices. And that makes sense if the device that you're building or the device that you're trying to sell is an RFID tag. But it's probably not the entire solution to the problem, all right? We need to introduce something else. So for a second group of people, the obvious next step to that was, let's introduce the service gateway. Service gateway is going to bring some of that intelligence, some of that decision making in the home already. So it's available to all the devices. Even when the internet connection is down, you don't have to send all of your data up to the cloud. So there's some privacy concerns that come into play. You can connect to other proximal networks on other physical network layers, right? So the service gateway already solves a lot of problems. But one of the core problems still exists, because typically a service gateway is going to work for 1, 2, 3 devices from the same manufacturer connecting to a certain service provider's backend, right? And that means that you're still not talking about all of your devices in the home communicating with each other. You're still talking with a subset of devices communicating with a gateway that on behalf of those devices communicates with the cloud. So we need to take it one step further. We need to do one thing more. We need to make the devices actually connected to each other. I happen to think that it's an Internet of Things, an Internet made up of things. It's not things just simply connected to the Internet. And that's important because as these devices become more powerful, as these devices become more or bigger sources of information, bigger sources of data in the home, the stuff that we can do with them completely standalone, even completely separate from a gateway, completely separate from a cloud environment is going to become absolutely staggering, absolutely impressive. So it's about pushing the intelligence of the connected home to the edge of the network. More intelligent devices, distributed intelligence across devices, not just about centralizing it at certain places in the home. That doesn't mean that the role of the service gateway isn't clear. There's a role for a service gateway in there as well. That doesn't mean that the cloud doesn't play a role in the Internet of Things. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But you're going to need all of these 3 components in order to make the Internet of Things truly shine. Because the intelligence of the devices is going to be what drives the new use cases. And that's where it's at. We're not doing technology for technology's sake. We're trying to create user experiences. As I put it there, we're trying to create intelligent ambient user experiences. And it's important to understand that a user experience is more than just the UI, right? I'm sure everyone is convinced of this. But if we look at the way that the poster childs of the Internet of Things generation, the devices that are out there today that are successful, you know, the Nests of the world, that they are setting this up, the way that they interface with users is through an app that connects to a backend, connects to a certain device. So even though it might seem very obvious to everyone out there that having these devices communicate with each other is the right way to set up the infrastructure, is the right way to set up these connections between devices, it isn't really reflected in the applications that we see on the market today, okay? And I think that's a problem, because average people, people who aren't like you and me, people who aren't interested in technology, who aren't maybe geeks and things like that, they're not looking to spend even more time with user interfaces. They're not looking to spend even more time setting up stuff, setting up configurations and things like that. The only meaningful thing that technology can do for them, beyond what their smartphone and their tablet and their computer and their TV already does for them, is give them more free time, provide them more comfort, give them more services without asking them to spend more time playing with technology. Technology should work in the background, ambient, on behalf of the user. That means that we need intelligent devices. That means that we need devices that are able to make decisions on behalf of the user, which means that these devices need to have access to the full context of the home. The only way that you can create a truly intelligent experience is if you take all of the parameters into account. And I think that's what it's going to take before we can actually sell the billions of devices and make trillions of dollars in revenue on the Internet of Things. If we just go about doing what has been demonstrated to work in smaller portions up until today, that's where we're going to plateau. That's where we're going to level out. So the next big jump is making these devices intelligent enough. So if you look at this picture, if you're like me, you've probably looked at all of the different devices that are in the picture and that you can connect, right? There's smartphones, tablets, refrigerator, oven, and so forth and so forth. But there's another part of the Internet of Things that we shouldn't forget. It's about people. It's about users. And these are individuals as well. Just like every device has its function, every device has information that it can share to better the experience with other devices, the experience should be customized for individual users as well, okay? So it's not just an Internet of Things, it's an Internet of Things and the people that use those things. And we need to make sure that we adapt the user experience to the expectations of the different user. I'm pretty sure that, you know, mom and the daughter in this example here have entirely different expectations, entirely different set of functions that they can actually leverage in the room. To solve that problem, one of the things that we're doing in the AllSeen Alliance, and Joe already hinted at it, is we're going to introduce something called Security 2.0. Security 2.0 takes a very user-centric view on things like this. There's a specific talk about Security 2.0 a bit later this morning, and then there's one in the afternoon. There's actually two in the afternoon. So if that's something that you're interested in, I definitely invite you to go to those sessions. But it's important, and we need to enable it from a framework level, because this needs to transcend the design process across all of the different brands. That's where the standardization part becomes really important. Okay. Now, if we talk about standardization, the biggest problem that people associate with standardization is the lack of ability to differentiate. If you go and standardize everything, it's going to be very difficult to come up with a differentiating user experience. Some people even say that standardization, to a certain extent, can get in the way of innovation. And if you do it wrong, I'm sure you can. I mean, if you do it like through classical standardization body, and it takes time, and you have to discuss everything, and you have to cover all of the ground before you even get your first letter of code done, I imagine that that could be the case. But for the AllSeen Alliance, we're taking a different approach. The way that we think that you can foster innovation in a standardized environment is by focusing on the stuff that you can't predict yet. We're building a framework that needs to be in devices that can be on the market or in use anytime, anywhere from 2 years up to even 15 years. Remember, you know, refrigerators, connected cars, all these things have a very, very long life cycle, right? And I think it's going to be impossible to predict today what the use cases are going to be for the future. we might be smart guys, but we don't have a crystal ball. We're not that intelligent, right? So how can we design something that we know will work today and we know will also still work within the next 5, 6, 7 years? That's the second shift in design paradigm that I think we need to take into account. First, intelligence on the devices working together. The second is, let's look at what remains the same throughout the life cycle of the device. And for almost all devices, it's going to be data. This is a quote from Tim Berners-Lee, who we all know, of course, as the creator of the World Wide Web. Not to be confused with Al Gore, the self-proclaimed inventor of the internet. But the quote is actually a very interesting one. It pertains to the way that the internet was handled, the World Wide Web was designed back in the 90s, right? We had HTML and we built web pages, and web pages were a way to convey information together with a way to structure that information and how that is displayed on the screen. So it was mixing data and the presentation layer. And we got away from that. We introduced things like CSS, we introduced things like JavaScript, so that we could define the presentation layer in a separate format. We could define the interaction model in a separate format. And what remains constant through all of this is the information, is the data itself. If a refrigerator has a temperature in 2014, we're damn sure that's going to have a temperature in 2020, for instance, right? That is the one thing that we know is still going to be there. It might be more. It might also tell us that certain things are about to expire and so forth and so forth. But at its core, that basic piece of information is usable today. It was usable 30 years ago, and it's going to be usable 30 years from now. So data is much more resilient to change. Joe was already mentioning it. We are championing the use of the data-driven API, specifically for the data-centric part of the solution. There's going to be a breakout session this afternoon hosted by my colleague Dominic, that if you're interested in this kind of thing, you should probably follow up on. The pointer thing isn't working anymore. Can someone flip this slide for me? I think I lost connection. That's the second thing. We need devices that actually run. Oh, that's even worse. Unless this is some way of telling me that my time is up, then that could be. All right, this is the one. All right, cool. So I mentioned before that it's very difficult to predict today what the actual use cases of the future are going to be, right? Think back to when the first smartphones were put on the market. One of the cooler features, one of the hallmark features of an iPhone back when it was released was the ability to adapt to the orientation that the user was using the phone in automatically. Use the accelerometer, use the gyro for that, right? Those were functions for which those sensors were built into the device. But Apple did a very smart thing. They decided to create APIs that allow developers to interact with those sensors, to interact with those data sources. And then the developer community, which as a whole is of course much smarter than any single company alone, came up with all of these cool use cases, you know, step counters and fitness applications and so forth, and you know, games and things like that. So it's actually quite impressive when you crowdsource development of new ideas and innovation in that way. So that's kind of what the goal of the AllSeen Alliance is. We want to be the SDK for the connected home. We want to position ourselves as the go-to source of information for everything that you might use to better your user experience towards your consumers. That's the promise of the AllSeen Alliance. And I think with the design that we have, and I'm sure you'll see that when you go through some of the sessions that'll be hosted this afternoon, I think with the design that we have, we're actually in a pretty good position. We're actually going to be in a pretty good position to pull this off and to help the rest of the community, which is you guys, but it's also developers everywhere, to come up with those exciting new use cases that are truly going to scale the Internet of Things to the figures that Rio has presented in the beginning of his deck. That's it. That's the story I had here for you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and for more details, I'll gladly refer you to the breakout sessions this afternoon. Thanks.